the Krampus, Spring-Heeled Jack, Baba Yaga. The archives are privy to many legends, some more obscure than others. But more importantly, it knows their origins. Welcome to the Archives. You may call me Fredrik, and my assistant over there is Benjamin. At least, I think he's my assistant. That wasn't made clear. In any case, our first examination will be on the Krampus. He has found a curious niche in recent years. His visage is undeniably devilish, with broad, curled horns, powerful hooves, and a toothy grimace. Though he is striking to behold, the most curious element of Krampus is not his appearance, but his association with Christmas. He is the tenebrous counterpart to the jolly Saint Nicholas, poised to punish nasty little children. Sources contradict one another about his origins, his practices, and even his appearance. So who is he? What is he? And what precisely does he want? The first and perhaps most important thing to note about Krampus is that he's not a single figure, but rather a species of mystical beast that roams in packs to cause their violent mischief. Chief among their activities is the collection of boys and girls on St. Nicholas's naughty list. To aid this practice, they carry large woven baskets or sacks on their backs, which they fill to the brim with children to whisk away into the night. Christmas plays from the 1800s give the Krampus a chance to deliver their manifesto to Santa Claus, which Al Ridner translated in his book, The Krampus and the Old Dark Christmas. Good children, though, are not my task, only for the bad I'm asked. For those my sack is neatly suited, their vexing screams and whining muted. Off I pack them to their fates, the spoiled little reprobates. With brats as these, one choice is fit, to toss them in the fiery pit. Thank you, Benjamin. Though their work is horrendous, it is confined to only 2 nights of the year, December 5th and 6th. Beyond this, however, there are very few concrete facts. Illustrations are inconsistent. Sometimes they are depicted with one hoof and one massive foot, and sometimes they eat children instead of throwing them into hell. There are no stories or tales of how he came to be Santa's most brutal helper, nor are there any ancient legends of people hunted by him. He seems simply to exist. Despite their lack of background, the Krampus does have a definite place of origin, in the high mountains and low valleys of Austria and southern Germany. In small towns and villages, far from the cities, the country folk retain a cultural memory for the Krampus, especially in the form of a unique practice known as the Krampuslauf, or Krampus Run. For these runs, small troops of men, known as Krampuspass, will don heavy coats made of sheep and goat hide, as well as special, horrifying masks whose look is dictated, in part, by tradition. These Krampuses are often accompanied by a Saint Nicholas, who leads the troop on winding routes through the town where they prance in high gates to clatter the massive iron bells strapped to their backs. What these roving packs do exactly depends on the town. Some will simply roam the streets, slapping people on the legs and hips with their switches and throwing them into the snow, while others will make house visits to families, delivering toys and sweets. In limited settings, costumed Krampuses will even wrestle with those of other troops, with their saints acting as referees who call back their Krampuses when they are too exhausted to continue. Despite the horrifying costumes, the Krampus runs are a time of good cheer, though many children will still rightly cower when the Krampuses come around. In some households, golden branches are displayed as mementos for children. Remember to be good, for the Krampus will be around again soon enough. Fortunately, we have good allies in our hunt for a progenitor, the brothers Grimm, specifically the younger, Jacob. In his book Teutonic Mythology, he makes a very brief reference to the Krampus, linking them to a mythological Austrian figure named Perchta. His assertion that she was a goddess, however, is not entirely accurate. Perchta is a terrifying creature in her own right, and subject to the same air of mystery and subjectivity as the Krampus. She is both young and old, beautiful and ugly, symmetric and asymmetric, and she fulfilled the duty of punishing those who broke holiday taboos. With her wicked wooden scissors, she would cut open the bellies of men and women, pulling out their organs and restuffing the bodies with wood shavings, soil, and waste before sewing them back up, making them into horrific dolls. As the isolated Austrian villages were Christianized, however, Perchta found herself associated with one Christian holiday in particular, the Feast of the Epiphany on January 6th, celebrating the discovery of the Christ child by the three Magi. But Perchta did not move alone. With her traveled an entourage of ghosts called the Perchten. Much like Perchta herself, the Perchten ghosts were eventually given a Christian bent and were said to be the spirits of those deserving neither heaven nor hell. Eventually, these ghosts were reinterpreted to be given physical form and earned the title of being magical spirits themselves, which were separated into two categories, the beautiful Perchten and the ugly Perchten. As time passed, the townsfolk of villages began performing Perchtenlauf, or Perchten runs, during the month of December, dressed as the ugly variant. It seems likely that this was adapted from other pagan practices, where people would dress up in the skins of animals, wear their heads, and visit houses to scare off evil spirits. Though most people know October to be the haunted month, this was not always the case. For Austria, before the groping hands of the church found its way there, it was December when the power of dark, menacing creatures was believed to be its highest, and their variety was just as great. No one would dare to even speak the word wolf during this time for fear of summoning a werewolf. Practices like the Perchtenlauf were a way of controlling and warding off these wintry spirits to make way for spring. These runs were rowdy events, and their participants often engaged in remarkably un-Christian activities. And so, the church began making an effort to control these runs. However, the isolated villages were none too fond of the church, and the church had few means to impose their will. Despite this, little by little, many villages began to include St. Nicholas's to appease and humor the church's representatives. Though it may seem odd today to attach such a jolly character to creatures as terrifying as the ugly Perchten, it would likely not have been so strange then. One of the miracles associated with St. Nicholas is the resurrection of 3 orphans out of a barrel of their own hacked-up flesh, which was to be sold on the market the next day. These saintly overseers, however, would often be abandoned by their parties in the middle of a run, and when this stopgap failed, the church banned the practice outright. However, this would not stop the villages, not entirely anyway. They posited, what if there was a creature, something that looked exactly like the Perchten, but was instead the servant of St. Nicholas, one that engaged in similar behaviors but to the church's ends? And what if we gave the Perchten a new name, something like, perhaps, Krampus? In practice, this change was probably more gradual, but the church seemed to accept the tamer Krampuslauf. Over the years, different towns would develop their own traditions, ones that continue even today. But the image of the Krampus would eventually see a radical change. In the 1800s, hearing of the wild Krampus runs out in the unfashionable villages, some designers from the city decided to make strange Krampus holiday greeting cards, often in poor taste. The problem was that none of these artists had ever seen anyone dressed in Krampus regalia, and so they took heavy liberties, drawing them more like devils and demons than the Perchten on which they were based. Most other city folk had never seen the Krampus either, and so their vision of him reflected the kitschy cards. This modernization of Krampus continues into the present day, with enthusiasts making even more horrific masks and outfits to increase his shock value, or more friendly versions fit for the malls and cities of Germany and beyond. The tamer version even has a name, Cuddle Krampus. But in the little isolated towns of Austria, the various Krampuspass continue their traditions. This dark, subservient cousin of Santa Claus is one of the final echoes of the haunted December season, an echo that grows louder by the year. Even groups labeling themselves Perkten have been revived, marching alongside the Krampus, indistinguishably increasing their numbers. Where the Krampus will run next is uncertain, but wherever they go, their mark is unmistakable.